rather than tilling everything completely, especially in the fall. We like to keep soils covered so that they're protected through the winter from wind erosion. We like to have growing roots in the ground, live roots, most of the year.
Mm-hmm.
There are periods during the winter that the soil microbes are pretty dormant just because of temperature. But anytime that we have tolerable temperatures for them to respire, they need carbohydrates. And they're fed carbohydrates literally by leaking plant roots. And so you need plants growing most of the year in order to make sure that that microbe population flourishes.
So that really would put an emphasis on having cover crops in between your growing season crops.
Absolutely. It puts a premium on cover crops. It puts a premium on crop rotation so that we aren't always growing these same crops. We've sort of gotten into a two crop rotation,
Mm-hmm.
and we really need to think about how we can expand that by including winter annuals, including forages, including other crops as well. But cover crops help tremendously in even our standard rotations.
As a climatologist, that makes really good sense to me is if you keep that soil covered almost all year, it's much less likely to blow away.
Absolutely.
And when you mentioned that 90% of the state had, degraded soils of some kind, is that primarily from wind, or is that a combination of wind and just a lot of water running off?
It's a combination of wind and water. It's really interesting. There are a number of places that you can go around the state and see this in operation. Um, if you go to a place where there is native prairie nearby farmland, there's often an elevation difference of a couple of feet between, where the native prairie was, where fence lines still exist, and then where the cropping land starts. And that represents two things. That represents soil that is either blown or washed away, and it also um, involves oxidized carbon that was in the soil that we've literally burned up by leaving it exposed.
I mean, traditionally, people leave their land exposed, have probably for several generations, I'm assuming.
Yes, exactly. Um, this is true worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of the way farming and agriculture sort of grew up before we knew what we were doing. It's true in lots of areas where the traditional agriculture involves, farming a particular acreage for a while, then moving on and, letting that other area just grow up wild again and starting someplace that's virgin. Well, if you do that long enough, then you have lots of areas of degraded land. And there are areas, particularly in Africa, where you can see this. This isn't strictly a U.S. problem.
Oh, sure, sure. Yeah. Well, and it's also, the farmers are not doing this with malicious intent.
Oh,
They're trying to
absolutely
earn a
not.
living. And, it's just like there's a lot of things that we do as a society or as individuals over time that we don't realize are necessarily bad until, there's enough study that shows, no, this really isn't good for you.
Yes, exactly. And that's really where we are. We have the bulk of farmers that face economic pressures to succeed on their, operations, and they tend to choose choices that deliver them the most profit and in the short term.
Hmm.
Um, we One of the real advantages, though, of cover cropping and a little regenerative sort of approach to agriculture is we can show or have shown in many instances that while gross revenues may go down for a while, net profits can increase. One of the real uh, impetus of the coalition is we're trying to make both the social but primarily the economic case by doing real studies on real farms
Hmm.
in Nebraska, showing exactly what the costs are and then the net benefits when you get to the other side where the resilience starts playing, where the microbes start re- replacing a lot of the mineral nutrients that exist in the soil but are not available. There are these fungi or a class of fungi called arbuscular mycorrhizae that are able to solubilize things like phosphorus and potassium, so we don't have to necessarily add them to soils as fertilizer, but our crops can't extract them from the minerals. But these mycorrhizae have the biochemical means to solubilize these and literally live in symbiotic relationship. The plant roots feed them carbon dioxide, and they in turn feed the plants soluble mineral elements. So lots of benefits that happen. The unfortunate part in this whole thing is it takes several years to change the populations of these soil organisms. Um, like any population change, things don't happen overnight, and it takes some years to return this ecological balance, if you will. And during that time, you can probably expect that there will be some increased costs and some lower returns until you get to the other side of that 3 years or 5 year period, depending on soils and areas. But once we get there, then there are tremendous benefits, tremendous economic benefits for producers. The integration of livestock and grazing on land. Um, if you look at our native prairies and the way they developed under bison grazing, if you will, in this area, uh, the promotion of plant root growth just from grazing is pretty impressive. Um, Kansas State published a paper not very long ago that showed that land that was being actively grazed actually sequestered more carbon
Hmm.
and was more effective environmentally than having the same plants and leaving them ungrazed. It also gives another economic opportunity for producers that they they can use crop residues and they can use cover crops
Hmm.
to grow beef or pork. I think having
Sure.
animals on the land
You could
is
use the manure for
yep.
nitrogen.
Use the manure for nitrogen. It all works together.
Yeah. Well, the other thing you talk about the native prairies with regard to significant rain events. So it's like I think the way we're experiencing climate change is through extreme events, including more rapid onset of droughts or flash droughts that are occurring later in the season than like in the fall that maybe we traditionally would have seen, and also these really big rain events. And
Exactly.
what I think is so critical about having healthy organic matter laden soils is that you can absorb a lot more of that water
Yes.
and you can retain a lot more of that water.
It's really interesting. I don't know if you know Paul Yassa. Paul is an ag engineer and has worked on the Rogers farm east of Lincoln for, gosh, 40 years, I think. But at any rate, when they started out there, the the soil would absorb or could absorb only like an inch and a half of rainfall an hour if it fell at a faster
And we
rate,
certainly get rainfall rates around here that are higher than that in the summer.
far higher than that in the summer. 5 inches an hour is not at all impossible in
No,
rainfall, I
it's
assume.
not. And that's not when it probably increasingly we'll see more of those types of events, most likely.
Exactly. But at any rate, the the old soil information indicated that it would absorb something like 2.5 inches an hour. But, those studies were done in the 30s and 40s and one thing and another, and the soil was partially degraded there. Paul has been managing that with absolute no-till and cover crops on most of it whenever he could. And the current infiltration rates are in excess of 6 inches an hour.
Wow.
And he's made such a difference. Not only does that make a difference in reduced soil loss and runoff and those sorts of things, but it makes a huge difference in crop productivity.
Mm-hmm.
You
Well,
know,
if you store that water,
he's approaching irrigated yields on dry land is
mm-hmm,
what it does. And
absolutely.
and on irrigated lands, one has the same net benefit because you don't have running and you can use larger droplet size, on pivots without, you know, compaction and running because of the soil structure itself.
Mm-hmm.
And you can absorb water much faster, and the organic matter in the soil takes care of that water and you don't lose it as
Yeah.
fast.
Well, if you maintain more of that 4 inch rain or retain more of that 4 inch rain and it lasts longer, you're using
You,
less water in irrigation.
that's exactly right.
So
You
you're
don't have
you're
to.
spending less money because that's a significant cost for I don't think some people that that are not from this part of the country, it's like they don't know that they realize just how much of an expense irrigation actually is. It's not
Exactly.
cheap.
It's not cheap.